And we'll actually go over forms a little bit later when we get into PHP. We're going to talk about the menu. The menu just looks like this, right? We're going to use a list, and we're going to have this links within the items. You guys have seen a couple examples of this already. Whenever we do a menu, we always do an unordered list and list items. Does anyone know why we do an unordered list and list items instead of just creating a bunch of links? It's not, visually they look the same.
Gets rid of the bullet points?
What?
Doesn't it get rid of the bullet points?
Actually, adding, maybe you misunderstood the question. Actually, adding the list, creating a list will actually add the bullet points. So if we do it this way, it's actually a little bit even more complicated, and in CSS we have to remove the bullet points again. But there's a good reason for actually putting these links within a list. Okay.
Don't just appear on the same line?
So yeah, if you didn't, they would appear on the same line, but that's not exactly what I'm getting at as well. You can fix that with CSS. Okay.
I mean, I want to say it's like there is a distinction between that, the menu, and just like regular, like a regular, what am I trying to say? Like, you want to make a distinction between it also so that you can manipulate that particular
That's true. That's true.
menu.
Yeah, no, that's not bad. I think you're on the right track. If you put it in its own, UL and LI, then it's quite easy to select. Chances are you won't have a lot of list elements in this. Does anyone else have just one more guess, and then I'm going to move on?
You can use CSS on that list specifically, or on that unordered list specifically. That way, just make it distinct from other lists.
So that's true. Also, you could, if you do an unordered list here, yeah, basically there's more. It's more distinct than other elements, and it's easier to select. But that's not actually exactly what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is really at the root of HTML. That's a markup language, right? And semantically, and this is kind of technical, when you have a menu, right? If you put that in layman's terms, if you talk to someone that doesn't really understand what a menu is, it's really a list of different links, of different sections. So when we write our HTML, even though it doesn't make too much of a difference in the long run if we use CSS, we still want to code things in such a way that they reflect, the true nature of what they are. So a menu is a list of objects. So we're going to use a list, and we're going to have list items, and then we're going to put the links within the list. Not because it looks any different, but just because semantically it gives more meaning to our code if we just look at the code, for what it is. And that will, come back and actually help you out when search engines come through and they look at your site. When a search engine comes through and they look at your website, they can't, they don't see the CSS and they can't figure out, oh, this kind of looks like a menu, so it's a menu, right? Or this is a collection of links that make up a menu. If you have a list like this, they'll come through and their spiders will see that it's actually, a collection of links and they belong together in some way. They relate together. Right?
So it's like a data abstraction.
A data abstraction? What do you mean?
I mean, yeah, like
What do you mean by semantics? Definition of semantics?
I just mean that HTML is a markup language. You want to give meaning to your content, right? Your additional content. So if you just had a bunch of different links, right? There's no way to tell if those links relate to each other in any way. It could just be that in your page you have two links next to each other, but they don't interact in any way, right? They link to two entirely different websites and their functionalities. But when you put them together in a list, it's kind of a list of internal links.
Okay.
A list of menu items, a list of links to in your web page. Does that make sense? I'm a little bit hard to explain.
Something about encapsulation.
Yes, sorry.
I was like, these terms.
I know what you mean, but I'm not sure how it relates. Are there any other?
So functionally, these two alternatives are the same, but this is just a good organization.
Yeah. So this is really quite technical, and I didn't mean to spend a lot of time on this, but yeah, if you didn't have these links and you styled them with CSS, you could get the exact same effect without doing this list. It's just nice to do the list because when we're coding our web pages, we want to keep in mind the fact that we want to associate meaning to our code, right? It's just like having divs before and separating out our code. Visually, that might not make a difference at all. We're not applying background images, background colors, but semantically, or in terms of marking up your code, associating more meaning to it, it organizes your code. It breaks it up and says they're different things, right? Okay. All right, so just fast forward and say that we completed coding up our HTML. And if you want to see the code for this, it's actually on the website. You can download it and view it. And if we actually drag that document into our web browser, we're going to see something interesting. All the perfect HTML that we've written, when we view it in our browser, it actually looks like this. And it doesn't quite look like this. I added background colors just so you can see where the divs end. And something's wrong here, right? This doesn't look like that. This isn't, on the left-hand side, this is on the right-hand side. We're not dividing this nicely. And so what happened, right? Why is this what we're getting instead of what we wanted? And it's just the same reason that we went through before. They're just block level elements, and we haven't given any other information except that there's two divs and they have these contents. And naturally, when you have elements in your document, they're just going to appear one on top of each other, your block level elements. So what we need to do is learn more CSS. So that's what we're going to do. So the first CSS property that we're going to go over is just height and width. And what they mean is basically exactly what they say. It's just going to set the width and height of your element. And you can set that two ways. You can either use percentages or pixels. When you use pixels, it's an absolute value, whereas that element is always going to be that size. If you use percentages, what's going to happen is, and I'll have an illustration of this in the next slide, it's actually going to take up 100% of the height and 100% of the width of its container element. Okay, so that means if you have a nested div, it's going to, and you set its width and height to 100%, it's going to take on the width and height of its parent. Okay. And here's kind of a quick example of that. So we have this one div with 100 pixel width and 100 pixel height. We put another div inside of it, and we set its width and height to 100%. And what's going to happen is it's just going to take on the width and height of its parent.
In the first site that you showed, the one we're trying to design, there's a large div that corresponds to the total content area.
Right.
Did you set that with absolute?
In that one, I would set that absolute. You have different design choices when you code up when you actually go ahead and build your website. But I would probably set that width to a certain set of pixels. And generally, what people have been using is 1,000 pixels, because before, when computers weren't that great, resolutions weren't that high. Most computers had a resolution of 1024 by 768, so they used just 1,000 pixels. Now, computers have gotten better, and but 1,000 pixels is still a pretty good bet. So probably on that one, if I were to code that, I would set the largest container, right, that has both sides, 2,000 pixels wide. Yeah.
And if you're accessing the website from an iPhone or something, would the web page still be 1,000 pixels long?
Yeah. So if you that's a good question. It would still be, but your iPhone, your iPod would do a little bit of something to make sure that it actually fits in. So it wouldn't be the same size as it take on your screen. Obviously, the pixels would be more dense, but it would still be 1,000 pixels. Any other questions?
You were just saying that the standard would be 1,000 for like a website. I've been told like 960.
960?
Yeah.
960. Yeah. So I mean, 1,000 or 960, it could be. Yeah. It's just whatever at the time that was established. It was a safe bet of what people could possibly see on the screen without having to scroll. Right? Okay. So here's another example. And this time, instead of having the outer div with the width set, we're going to actually set it to use auto. And what auto means is it's going to actually inherit its width and height from its child, right? So it's going to be large enough to accommodate its children. Okay? So if we set this to 100 pixels now, it's going to grow, and its parent is just going to grow as well. And these are kind of the general behaviors of divs. This isn't exactly quite true. You'll see this a little bit later, but this is a good enough approximation. And when you deal with divs more and widths and heights, you'll kind of figure out how they work. And a really good tip is when you're messing with widths and height and you're positioning your layouts and things, it's really nice to set background colors just so you can see where things are. Okay. So let's talk about positioning now. So position is just set with 3 values: absolute, relative, fixed, and static. But static is basically the default behavior. So absolute, when you set the position to absolute, it basically sets the position's offset relative to the closest, to its closest ancestor, right? Ancestor that also has its position set. And if there's no parent that has its position value set, it's going to go and set its set the position of your element relative to the actual dimensions of your browser, so the top left corner of your browser. So whenever we do this, it's always going to be kind of the top left. Relative is going to take, and we'll have illustrations later. Relative is going to take the current natural location of your element, and then when you give it offsets, move that element based on its kind of natural place of where it already is. Okay? And fixed is going to always make it relative to the boundaries of your browser window. So when I said offset, the way that you specify offset really is by using these arguments, top, left, and there's actually right and bottom also. Okay? So let me go back one slide really quick. A quick note is when you set the position of an element to absolute or fixed, it's going to remove that object from the flow of the document. Okay, and that probably sounds like witchcraft right now, but I'll explain it. It basically means that that element, the space that it was originally taking up, is no longer going to be occupied by that element. So elements surrounding it are going to behave as if that element was not there. So here's an example of that. Position static, if you guys remember, I just said it really quickly, is that this is the default way, right? So you set position static, you basically haven't changed anything, okay? And it's useful to know position static in case you want to override, you know, a previous position that you've already set up. And here's relative. Everything is still where it should be. All of a sudden we set this to absolute, and you'll see that these two spans basically behave as if this div wasn't there at all, right? They're just going to be next to each other and ignore this div. That's because it's been removed from the document flow, as we call it, okay? So this occupies no space in, you know, if your page were actually only this wide and you added another span, that span would wrap around naturally and it would be underneath this div. Right? Everything just acts as if the div weren't there at all.
Would be the next span would be underneath.
Yeah, so if your document are only this wide, this is the example, right? And you add another span, because your document is only this wide, it's going to wrap. And when it wraps, it's just going to just be right under the div, right? That's where it would naturally be anyway, if the div weren't there.
I would think it would be above the div. If the div is...
You mean on top?
Yeah.
It could be on top, it could be on the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just occupying the same space is what I mean.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
So what's the difference between absolute and fixed position?
And fixed? Yeah, I'll go over that in a second. Just keep in mind that if you set this to absolute or fixed, this kind of behavior is going to happen. It's not going to influence the positioning of objects around it. So here's 3 elements, and we've applied position static, and we gave it offsets. Okay, but because the position is static, that means unchanged. It's not gonna, these offsets that we specified aren't gonna influence it at all, right? So the div naturally belongs here, and that's where it is. It hasn't moved at all, right? That was, okay. So this example, we set the position to relative. So what's gonna happen here? The div originally occupies this space. Can anyone guess where the div is now going to be? Remember, it's gonna be positioned relative to where it originally was, and then it's going to be offset by these values. Can anyone guess?
In the middle of the top span.
It's going to be middle of the top span? Not quite.
But offset.
It's going to take its original position,
What's right here?
and it's going to move relative to its original position, right? Just 10 pixels down and 10 pixels from the left.
Next example.
And then let's look at absolute. Originally, the div was down here. Where's it going to be now? Similar to relative. 10 pixels from where? From here? From here, right? Okay, good. So did everyone